November 5th, 2010. Morning, Barnsley. The winter air was cold and still, wrapping the town in silence. But inside a modest house on a quiet street, a nightmare was beginning. Two young boys, innocent and trusting, were about to face a darkness no one could have imagined. Sarah Barrass, 30 years old, seemed like any ordinary mother, caring, familiar, someone no one would ever suspect. How could someone so familiar hide a storm capable of such tragedy? This was not an accident born of anger, nor a fleeting lapse of judgment. This was deliberate, cold, and horrifying, a choice that destroyed two lives forever. Every action, every moment, was a descent into unimaginable cruelty. Inside South Yorkshire's darkest female offenders, her name is remembered not for who she seemed, but for the lives she shattered. Welcome to True Crime with Tyler, where Barnsley streets whisper secrets and the most notorious female criminals are finally unmasked. Today, we expose the chilling true story of a woman whose rage and fractured mind turned an ordinary home into a scene of horror, and whose actions continue to haunt the nation. What you're about to hear may stay in your mind long after the screen fades to black. Sarah Barrass, 38 years old, on a cold and silent morning in Barnsley, a quiet neighborhood that most believed safe, became the scene of a tragedy that would shock everyone who heard about it. Inside a modest family home, her two young sons, innocent and full of life, were about to face a fate no child should ever know. The boys, aged 8 and 10, had lived lives filled with ordinary routines, laughter, and small joys, never imagining that the danger would come from the person meant to protect them. To neighbors and friends, Sarah Barrass appeared like any other mother, quiet, reserved, and living her life largely behind closed doors. She smiled at passing acquaintances, waved to children playing in the street, and gave the impression of a caring parent. But behind the walls of her home, darkness had quietly settled. That morning, Sarah made a choice that would forever alter the lives of her family and shock the entire community. Her sons were murdered, an act so cruel and incomprehensible that the news left everyone struggling to process the horror. Authorities were alerted when a concerned relative, sensing something was wrong, contacted the police. Officers arrived to a scene that no one could have prepared for. Inside the house, the two boys lay lifeless, their small bodies bearing the tragic consequences of a crime so brutal it defied understanding. Investigators meticulously examined every corner of the home, collected evidence, and spoke to those closest to the family, slowly piecing together the horrifying events that led to this devastating act. As the investigation unfolded, the full extent of the crime became clear. Sarah Barrass had deliberately targeted the most vulnerable, those who trusted her completely. The prosecution detailed her actions in court, emphasizing the premeditation and callousness of her decision. Every detail painted a picture of a mother who had betrayed the sacred trust of her children, transforming a home into a place of unimaginable terror. At Barnsley Crown Court, the trial lasted several weeks, with harrowing testimonies from family, friends, and experts who described the impact of the murder. The judge described the crime as heartless, shocking, and profoundly disturbing. Sarah Barrass was found guilty of murder, and on the 12th of September 2024, she was sentenced to life imprisonment, with a minimum term of 35 years. Outside the courtroom, relatives and neighbors struggled to comprehend the enormity of what had occurred. One family friend said, "We never imagined she could do this to her own children. It is something that will haunt all of us forever." The case reverberated across the community, not just for the act itself, but because of the shocking betrayal of a mother toward her own sons. If you enjoy learning about the hidden truths of crime stories, consider hitting that like button and subscribing for more content like this. And please comment below to let me know where you're listening from. Kerry Taylor, 34 years old. On a warm evening in Sheffield, a normally quiet street became the setting for a shocking and violent act that would leave the community in disbelief. Inside a small apartment, Pearl Simone Hancock, a woman known to friends and neighbors as polite and unassuming, would become the victim of a crime so brutal it would shake everyone who heard of it. What began as an ordinary evening quickly descended into chaos and tragedy. Pearl, 29 years old, had lived a life like many others, working, socializing, and building connections with those around her. To those who knew her, she was kind, thoughtful, and always willing to lend a hand. But to Kerry Taylor, someone she knew casually, Pearl became the target of a sudden, violent attack. In a moment of unchecked aggression, Kerry stabbed Pearl, an act of cruelty that would end her life and leave a permanent scar on the local community. Neighbors reported hearing a commotion late that evening, followed by frantic calls for help. Police arrived quickly at the scene, only to find Pearl gravely wounded, struggling for her life. Despite immediate medical intervention, the injuries inflicted were catastrophic. Pearl succumbed to the stab wounds, leaving friends, family, and neighbors grappling with the incomprehensible loss. Investigators combed through the apartment, examining every detail for evidence. Witnesses were interviewed, phone records scrutinized, and CCTV footage reviewed. It became clear that the attack was deliberate, a sudden eruption of violence with fatal consequences. Kerry Taylor was arrested shortly after, and the gravity of the crime became impossible to ignore. At Sheffield Crown Court, the prosecution presented a clear narrative of the events that led to Pearl's death. The evidence showed a deliberate and violent attack carried out with a weapon, leaving Pearl no chance to defend herself. Witnesses recounted the moments leading up to the stabbing, describing the fear and confusion that gripped the apartment. The court heard how a life ended far too soon, the victim robbed of any possibility of future, and a community left to process the horror of the act. After a thorough trial, Kerry Taylor was found guilty of murder. The judge described the crime as violent, deliberate, and utterly senseless, emphasizing the permanent loss suffered by Pearl's loved ones. On the 3rd of March 2024, she was sentenced to life imprisonment with a minimum term of 18 years. Outside the court, friends and family struggled to contain their grief. One close acquaintance said, "She was kind and full of life. To lose her like this is unbearable. Nothing can ever prepare you for such a senseless act." The case sent ripples through Sheffield, serving as a reminder that violence can strike unexpectedly, even in the lives of those who seem safe within their own homes. The story of Kerry Taylor and Pearl Simone Hancock stands as a stark warning. Even brief encounters can end in tragedy, and the shadow of human cruelty can reach anyone, anywhere. It reminds us that life is fragile, trust is precious, and the consequences of unchecked violence can be devastating and irreversible. Rebecca Moore, 27 years old. In the usually calm streets of Sheffield, a shocking act of violence unfolded in a local park, one that would leave the community horrified and grieving. Sakad Ali, a young man known for his quiet demeanor and friendly nature, was about to become the victim of a brutal and senseless attack. What started as a seemingly ordinary day turned into a nightmare that no one could have anticipated. To those who knew her, Rebecca Moore appeared unassuming, a woman living a life that seemed ordinary and unremarkable. But beneath this exterior lay a willingness to commit a violent and calculated act. On that fateful day, she lured Sakad Ali into the park, where he was confronted with a violent and terrifying situation. In the chaos that followed, a knife was used in an attack so severe that it would leave permanent scars on the family, friends, and the wider community. Witnesses in the park reported seeing the confrontation unfold, with panic and fear evident in Sakad's final moments. Police were alerted immediately, rushing to the scene to find him gravely injured. Despite rapid medical intervention, the assault inflicted critical injuries, ultimately leading to his death. Investigators later confirmed that Rebecca Moore had played a central role in orchestrating the attack, manipulating events to ensure Sakad Ali could not defend himself. Authorities conducted a thorough investigation, collecting CCTV footage, witness statements, and forensic evidence from the park. Each detail confirmed the deliberate and premeditated nature of the crime. Rebecca Moore, alongside accomplices, had planned the encounter, turning a public space into a stage for a violent act. The evidence left little room for doubt about her involvement and the severity of the attack. At Sheffield Crown Court, the prosecution presented a clear narrative of the events, highlighting the planning, manipulation, and execution of the knife attack. The court heard of the fear, confusion, and helplessness experienced by Saad Ali in his final moments, painting a harrowing picture of a life ended far too soon. The judge described the crime as cold, calculated, and utterly reprehensible, emphasizing the vulnerability of the victim and the deliberate nature of the attack. After a detailed trial, Rebecca Moore was found guilty of murder. On the 21st of February 2024, she was sentenced to life imprisonment, with a minimum term of 15 years. Friends and family of Saad Ali spoke outside court, expressing shock and grief over the loss. One close friend said, "We never imagined she could do this. His life was taken for no reason, and it has left a hole in all our hearts." The story of Rebecca Moore serves as a stark reminder. Even public spaces can become dangerous, and trust can be exploited with devastating consequences. It underscores the need for vigilance, awareness, and justice for those whose lives are tragically cut short. Josie Hollis, 26 years old, in a quiet neighborhood of Sheffield, a tragic and violent incident unfolded, leaving a community stunned and a family devastated. Jordan Hill, a young father known for his kindness and dedication to his child, became the victim of a shocking attack that would end his life far too soon. What began as an ordinary evening turned into a nightmare that no one could have anticipated. To those around her, Josie Hollis appeared unremarkable, living a life that seemed ordinary, blending seamlessly into her community. But beneath this exterior, she became involved in a violent and calculated crime. On that fateful day, she targeted Jordan Hill, using deceit and coercion to set the stage for a brutal encounter. In the ensuing struggle, a knife was used in a deliberate attack, leaving Jordan fatally wounded and shocking those who knew him. Witnesses later recounted seeing the attack unfold, the panic and fear evident in Jordan's final moments. Emergency services were called immediately, rushing to the scene to provide aid. But despite rapid medical intervention, the injuries inflicted proved fatal. Jordan's life was tragically cut short, leaving friends, family, and neighbors grappling with grief and disbelief. Police investigations revealed that Josie Hollis had participated in a robbery. Further complicating the crime, authorities collected CCTV footage, forensic evidence and witness testimonies, piecing together a harrowing picture of the events leading to Jordan's death. The investigation confirmed that the attack had been deliberate and that Josie played a central role, turning what should have been a safe space into a scene of violence. At Sheffield Crown Court, the prosecution presented a detailed narrative of the crime, describing how Josie Hollis and her accomplices carried out the assault and robbery. The court heard how Jordan Hill, a devoted father, had no chance to defend himself, highlighting the cruel and opportunistic nature of the act. The judge described the events as shocking, violent, and utterly reprehensible, emphasizing the lasting impact on Jordan's family and the wider community. Following a thorough trial, Josie Hollis was found guilty of manslaughter and robbery. On the 14th of June 2024, she was sentenced to 15 years in prison. Outside the court, family members and friends struggled to come to terms with the devastating loss. One close friend said, "He was a loving father and a kind soul. We never imagined this could happen. It's something that will haunt all of us forever." The story of Josie Hollis serves as a grim reminder. Even ordinary spaces can become sites of unimaginable violence, and trust can be manipulated with fatal consequences. It underscores the need for vigilance, the protection of the vulnerable, and the pursuit of justice for those whose lives are tragically cut short. Carol Dawson, 41 years old, in the normally quiet streets of Barnsley, a shocking and chilling act of violence unfolded, leaving a community in disbelief. Carol, alongside her neighbor Gary Dean, became involved in a crime so brutal that it would send shockwaves through everyone who heard of it. What began as ordinary interactions between neighbors quickly descended into a nightmare that no one could have anticipated. To those around her, Carol Dawson appeared like any other member of the community, friendly, reserved, blending into everyday life without drawing attention. But behind closed doors, a dangerous alliance had formed. Alongside Gary Dean, she planned and carried out a murder that would forever stain the lives of all involved. Their actions were deliberate, calculated and devastating, targeting someone they knew personally. Neighbors later reported the day of the incident as strangely quiet, unaware of the danger that lurked just beyond their doors. Police were called after the crime was discovered, and the scene they encountered was horrifying. The victim, attacked by both Carol Dawson and Gary Dean, had been deliberately harmed, leaving the community shocked by the cold-blooded nature of the act. Investigators meticulously gathered evidence, interviewed witnesses, and reconstructed the events that led to the tragedy, uncovering the deliberate and coordinated planning behind the murder. At Barnsley Crown Court, the prosecution presented a clear narrative of the events, highlighting the conspiracy between Carol Dawson and her neighbor. Witnesses and evidence revealed how the two had targeted their victim with intent, leaving no chance for defense. The judge described the crime as heartless, calculated and utterly reprehensible, emphasizing the betrayal of trust within a seemingly safe neighborhood. Following a thorough trial, Carol Dawson was found guilty of murder alongside Gary Dean. On the 5th of June, 2024, she was sentenced to life imprisonment with a minimum term of 26 years. Outside the court, family members and friends of the victim expressed shock and grief. One relative said, "We never imagined that someone we trusted could plan something so cruel. It's a loss that will haunt us forever." The story of Carol Dawson serves as a stark reminder. Even in close-knit communities, danger can emerge from those we least suspect. Trust can be manipulated with deadly consequences, and ordinary lives can be shattered in an instant. Her actions, carried out with planning and cold calculation, left a permanent mark on the community, highlighting the devastating impact of betrayal and violence. This case stands as a warning that appearances can be deceiving, and that vigilance is essential even among neighbors. When cruelty is deliberate, it leaves scars far beyond the immediate victims, touching families, communities, and everyone who witnesses the consequences of such acts. Sabrina Hurst, 28 years old, in a quiet neighborhood of Sheffield, a tragic and devastating story unfolded, leaving a family and community in shock. Tiffany Wright, a 3-year-old girl full of life and innocence, became the victim of prolonged neglect and cruelty. What should have been a safe and nurturing home turned into a place of suffering, where a young child's vulnerability was exploited and her life was tragically cut short. To those around her, Sabrina Hurst appeared ordinary, living quietly in the community, blending seamlessly into the daily routines of life. Neighbors and friends had no reason to suspect the danger lurking within the home. Tiffany, trusting and unaware of the harm, relied entirely on her mother for protection, care, and guidance. Instead, she was exposed to neglect and emotional cruelty that would ultimately prove fatal. Authorities were alerted when Tiffany's condition worsened. Prompting emergency intervention, investigators discovered clear evidence of abuse and neglect. Medical examinations and witness statements confirmed that Tiffany had suffered both physically and emotionally, her small body and spirit bearing the devastating consequences of prolonged mistreatment, it became evident that the harm inflicted was deliberate, a repeated pattern that left irreversible damage. At Sheffield Crown Court, prosecutors presented the full account of events, detailing how Sabrina Hurst's neglect and cruelty led directly to Tiffany Wright's manslaughter. The court heard harrowing testimonies, describing the suffering Tiffany endured in the betrayal of trust by her mother. Experts highlighted the severity of the emotional and physical neglect, painting a grim picture of a child deprived of care, attention, and safety in the one place she should have been protected. The judge described the case as heart-wrenching, tragic, and utterly unacceptable. Emphasizing the vulnerability of Tiffany, he highlighted the responsibility of parents to safeguard their children and the irreversible harm caused. When that trust is broken, Sabrina Hurst was found guilty of manslaughter due to neglect and cruelty. On the 10th of April 2024, she was sentenced to 12 years in prison, reflecting the gravity and long-lasting impact of her actions. Outside the courtroom, family members and community members expressed shock and grief. One relative said, "Tiffany was so small, so full of life. We trusted her mother to care for her, and this loss is unbearable. It is something that will haunt us forever." The case reverberated throughout Sheffield, reminding the community of the importance of vigilance in protecting vulnerable children. This tragic story serves as a stark warning. Even in what should be the safest place, the home, danger can exist when trust is betrayed. Neglect and cruelty have devastating consequences, and those responsible must be held accountable for the irreversible harm they inflict. Cyrus Scarborough, 32 years old. In the usually calm streets of Sheffield, a night of sudden and shocking violence unfolded, one that would leave the community stunned and investigators racing to understand what had pushed a local woman to such brutality. What began as an ordinary evening quickly spiraled into chaos, and with two separate attacks that carried the kind of force and intent no one could have imagined. To many who lived nearby, Cyrus appeared unremarkable, quiet, distant, someone who drifted through the neighborhood without drawing attention. But beneath that quiet surface was a volatility waiting for the wrong moment to ignite, and on that night it did. Without warning, Cyrus targeted two men in separate but equally disturbing assaults, each attack showing a level of aggression that left witnesses shaken and victims severely injured. The first incident happened suddenly and without provocation. A man was approached, confronted, and struck with such force that the blow caused a deep and damaging injury to his eye. He collapsed in pain, disoriented, unable to understand why he had been singled out. Emergency services were immediately called, and paramedics quickly realized the seriousness of the trauma. The injury was not only severe, it carried the risk of long-term vision loss. Before officers could locate Cyrus, a second attack occurred. This time, a different man became the target, and this confrontation turned even more dangerous. With a knife in hand, Cyrus launched a violent assault, delivering a slash that left the victim bleeding and terrified. Witnesses later described the scene as chaotic, with people shouting for help as Cyrus fled into the night. The attack was fast, deliberate, and left the victim fearing for his life. Police launched an urgent search, gathering CCTV footage, eyewitness accounts, and forensic evidence to track Cyrus's movements. It didn't take long before officers closed in, locating her in the city. She was arrested without incident, but during interviews, she offered no clear explanation, no motive, no remorse, no moment of hesitation. The evidence, however, was overwhelming. At Sheffield Crown Court, Prosecutors laid out the disturbing details of the assaults. They described how Cyrus Scarborough acted with clear intent, inflicting injuries that could easily have cost one man his eyesight and another his life. The judge listened to medical reports, victim statements, and the accounts of those who witnessed the panic and fear of that night, calling the attacks brutal, unprovoked, and deeply alarming. The judge emphasized the danger Cyrus posed to the public. After reviewing all evidence, the court sentenced her to 18 years in prison, a sentence reflecting both the severity of the injuries and the unpredictability of her actions. Outside the courtroom, one victim said, "I still don't understand why it happened. I don't know if I ever will. I'm just grateful to be alive." This case serves as a reminder that violence can erupt without warning, and even ordinary streets can become scenes of sudden danger when a single person chooses brutality over restraint. Susan Hardwick, 52 years old, in the quiet town of Doncaster. A shocking and distressing event unfolded within the walls of a family home and hospital, leaving the community stunned. Susan's 89-year-old mother, a frail woman who had spent nearly 9 decades navigating life's challenges, became the target of an act that no one could have imagined. What should have been a place of care and safety was transformed into a scene of fear and attempted tragedy. To those around her, Susan Hardwick appeared ordinary, living a life that seemed unremarkable and blending seamlessly into her community. But behind closed doors, she made a decision that would horrify anyone who knew the family. In a moment of calculated action, she attempted to suffocate her elderly mother with pillows while she was in hospital, an act of violence that could have ended her mother's life. Staff at the hospital noticed unusual behavior and quickly intervened, preventing what could have been a fatal outcome. Authorities were called immediately, and an investigation into the incident was launched. Medical staff described the situation as both alarming and incomprehensible, struggling to understand how a daughter could attempt such a deliberate act against her own mother. Police meticulously collected evidence, interviewed witnesses, and reviewed security footage. The investigation confirmed the deliberate nature of Susan Hardwick's actions. Hospital staff, family members, and caregivers all recounted moments of fear and confusion, describing how quickly an ordinary day turned into a near tragedy. It became clear that this was not a moment of accidental harm, but an intentional attempt to end the life of a vulnerable elderly woman. At Doncaster Crown Court, prosecutors presented a detailed account of the events, emphasizing the premeditation and deliberate intent behind the attack. Witnesses described the fear, shock, and distress experienced by hospital staff and family members during the incident. The judge described the act as chilling, heartless, and entirely unacceptable, highlighting the vulnerability of the victim and the gravity of the attempted crime. Following a thorough trial, Susan Hardwick was found guilty of attempted murder. The court emphasized the severity of targeting a frail, elderly family member in a place of care, underlining the betrayal of trust inherent in the act. On the 18th of May 2024, she was sentenced to a significant custodial term, reflecting the seriousness of the attempted crime and the need to protect vulnerable individuals from harm. Outside the court, family members and advocates expressed shock and disbelief. One hospital staff member said, "It's unimaginable that someone could attempt this to their own parent. We are grateful the intervention prevented a tragedy." The case resonated throughout Doncaster, highlighting the dangers that can emerge even within family relationships and the importance of vigilance in protecting the vulnerable. This story serves as a warning. Even in places designed for care and safety, danger can arise and trust can be tragically betrayed. Susan Hardwick's actions remind us that the protection of the elderly and vulnerable must remain a priority, and deliberate attempts to harm them are met with the full force of the law.